Why is feedback so hard for people?
Because it's easier to avoid the truth, maybe, at least in the short term versus the long term. If we're going to commit to having a healthy feedback culture, the real commitment that we're making is we're going to talk about what's real. And I think we all maybe subconsciously or sometimes consciously know if I'm going to talk what's real in and about other people, then I'm opening the door to what's real being talked about with regard to me. And that's a tougher standard to live with. So I guess why is it hard? Because it's easy to avoid.
Why are we talking about it today?
I'll never forget, she was one of the best leaders I ever worked with, but it didn't feel that way at first because I started working with this woman and immediately she had so much feedback for me. And it was like little things. She was just like pointing out like all these things that I could be doing different, that I could be doing better, preferences. And it frazzled me at first. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm doing a horrible job. And then I'll never forget, she pretty quickly set expectations for me. She said, Alex, I give feedback early, clearly, and often. And that's not because you're doing a bad job. I actually think you're doing a good job. I just want you to know what I'm thinking so it doesn't allow it to get built up. And she became one of my favorite leaders I've ever worked for. Why? Because I felt so safe and comfortable around her, which was kind of the opposite of what you expect. But the reason why I felt safe and comfortable around her is because I knew if she's thinking something, she's going to tell me. And I realized that, man, there's these other leaders that I've worked with in the past that it became clear over time they were thinking things, they just didn't tell me. And I just made the decision like, man, I'm going to be the type of person that when I see something, I say something, and then I revert to normalcy really, really quickly.
I've heard you say this multiple times now, and it's good feedback is like telling someone they have spinach in their teeth.
Yeah, and here's what's crazy. You didn't know this. The person that I learned that from was that woman.
Oh, there
right?
you go.
And so she like reformulated. She's like, Alex, here's what you got to know is like when I give you feedback about something that I can think can be better, or like there's a better way for you to do something, or that's not aligned with our expectations. She's like, it's just like me telling you you have spinach in your teeth. And she's like, would you rather me be the person that will sit with you at the table the whole meal and not tell you, or would you rather me just mention like, hey, you've got spinach in your teeth? And I said, well, obviously the latter. And she's like, that's what this is all about.
So how do you do that in a healthy way?
I think that's in some ways what this whole episode is about. And really, we're kind of recording this episode as a primer for the growth room that we're going to be doing within the Basecamp community here soon. So we're going to talk about a lot of actions about how you do that. But I think a good overarching kind of principle-based approach to the way we're talking about this is found in Matthew 6, right? It's in the Sermon on the Mount. And Jesus basically says, you hypocrites, why do you point out the speck that is in your brother's eye without first taking the log out of your own eye? And he said, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly enough to take the speck out of your brother's eye. So how do we position ourselves and posture ourselves to give feedback well? Deal with our own stuff first is what I would say. And I heard Tim Keller give a message on this once that was so powerful and profound because it highlighted the value that's actually in that illustration. You know, if you have something in your eye, how do you take that out? Or how do you want other people to help you take that out? Is it, hey, let me take this knife and let me get that out of your eye? No, right? Because the eye is like one of the most sensitive parts of your body, right? It's incredibly fragile. And so, man, we want to operate with great care and great empathy and great intentionality when we're taking something out of our eye. And if we know we want that for our own eye, then that will kind of change the way that we approach other people with their imperfections and mistakes. And so don't believe that you're the perfect one that's pointing out the imperfections in others. Rather, think about your own imperfections and think about how you want to be treated.
So we have 5 principles we're going to talk about today. Do you want to jump into the first one?
Yeah, and I would actually kind of think of them as actions, right? They're principle-based actions for delivering feedback well. And I think what we already said is kind of embedded in action item number 1 is reflect on how you would want to be treated. This really should feel just like a speed bump, right? Because so often as a leader, you're moving really fast, you've got objectives, you've got aim, and you see something that's a deviation from that aim or that objective, and you just go 90 miles an hour. And if you're not careful, and if I'm not careful, I don't think about how the person on the receiving end of the feedback will kind of engage with that 90 miles an hour, because this is just some small thing to me, but to them, it's like, man, I just got course corrected on how I'm doing my job, and I might have spent a lot of time, energy, thought doing this really well, and now I'm getting feedback on it. So just think to yourself, how do I want to be treated in this situation? It doesn't mean everything has to be some massively formal conversation, but it should change our heart posture of like, why am I sharing this? It's in their best interest. And that's always the motive. So reflect on how you would want to be treated and make sure that that influences and affects the way that you deliver feedback.
I mean, that's the golden rule, right?
Yeah.
Treat others as you want to be treated. How does that weigh in when, like, you know, personalities are different? Some people are going to prefer feedback in maybe in one way versus another way, right? Like, I think some people can take more direct feedback on the chin and it's not an issue, but then others might take it more personally. How do you navigate that principle or that action in that context?
Yeah, well, in some ways, we need to make sure that we are being intentional about the culture that we're creating, right? So culture is either what you create or what you tolerate, right? And if you are the type of person that you like rapid feedback, non-emotional, depersonalized, detached, obviously in a kind and friendly and honest way, but you're not the type of person that can sit down and have an hour conversation anytime we need to talk about something different, right? Or a disagreement that we have. If that's not how you're wired and that's not how you operate, well, then make sure that's embedded in the culture of your organization and in your hiring process, right? Because in some ways, if you're saying this is something that I'm not really going to change all that much, well, then you need to make sure that the people you're hiring and onboarding are opting in for that culture, right? And there's nothing that I said in terms of those expectations that are necessarily wrong, but you just articulated that's not for everyone. And so what you do have a responsibility to do is not to change who you are, but you do have a responsibility to make sure people are clear whenever they're entering the organization. This is who we are and this is how we operate. And what you'll often find is you'll have less of that misalignment oftentimes.
What's the second action?
Yeah, establish agreed upon standards. A lot of times feedback is just given instead of standards, and that's incorrect. That's improper leadership, right? Because what we're saying there is like, we're not going to take the time as a leader to describe our expectations, to describe what we actually want, to describe our vision for where we're going. We're just going to play reactive whack-a-mole whenever we see things we don't like. And this idea of establishing standards proactively is really rooted in a view of humanity that says, man, most people most of the time are just doing the best that they can. And that if we as a leader do our job, which is one of our core responsibilities of creating a clear picture of what winning looks like, then we give people the opportunity to take action towards winning. When we don't do that, we shouldn't really be upset whenever they're not meeting our mysterious, unclarified, ambiguous expectations. How can other people know your expectations if you don't, is the question that I would ask. And so establishing clear standards.
So let's say someone hasn't established a standard, something happens and they realize, oh, I need to give this person feedback. What's a healthy way to approach that when you haven't set expectations well? Or you realize that you just realized you had those expectations and you didn't even realize that you had them.
I'm going to turn this question around you because I know for a fact I've done this to you before. So, right, like, and I don't necessarily think that it's inherently wrong, right? Or that I'm a bad leader just because this happens in a fast growing, like fast paced organization. But if there have been times where I've had those conversations with you, well, what have I done?
You actually state that fact of like, hey, like this is an expectation that I had that I didn't realize I had, or this is something that we haven't stated that I'd like to create as a standard moving forward. And I guess in some way you're opening up the ability to like have a conversation about it, and you're approaching it with humility instead of just, oh, like this is how it should be. and then, just kind of giving them marching orders and moving on.
Yeah. And yeah, well, I didn't ask you that question just for you to tell everyone how humble I am, but thank you. Yeah. Yeah. But what's now, let's be very real here. It could be really easy to kind of scapegoat, because in some ways, whenever you're saying, man, I didn't even realize I had these expectations, now I'm realizing it. You're now saying I bear part of the blame for where things ended up in some ways. And it's way easier to scapegoat and be like, you bear the blame for where things ended up, right? I was listening to something literally this morning that scapegoat is like Old Testament language. They would put their hands on the goat, and in the process of putting their hands on the goat, they would transfer their sin and curse onto the goat, and then they would send it out into the desert, right? And as leaders, dang, we have a propensity to scapegoat people, right? Things that are actually my thing that I played a role in creating the bad outcomes we experience. I just put on you as my goat, and then I send you out to the desert.
Yeah. Is there any way to like monitor whether or not you're doing that? Like, what are the questions that a leader could ask themselves to make sure that they're not doing that before providing feedback?
Yeah. Are people regularly leaving on bad terms? So it's a pretty good lagging indicator, because if people are regularly leaving on bad terms, and you just can't find people that will stay, it's probably not the people that are the problem, right? There's probably something in your leadership that is the issue that needs to be dealt with. So that's kind of one broad overarching indicator. But then another one, and it's actually one of our actions on here if we want to jump ahead, is, what feedback do you have for me? And that's actually, I word that question very particularly. It's not, do you have feedback for me? Because if you ask a yes or no, do you have feedback for me? That's a question that, especially if you're not in the most healthy spot as a leader, the path of least resistance is to say no, right? And so we assume an answer. It could even be positive feedback, right? It could be neutral feedback, but we assume the person sitting across from me has opinions and they know what it's like to be on the other side of my leadership. And I need to know what that is. So I'm not going to ask them, do you have it? I'm going to ask them, what feedback do you have for me?
Yeah. I love that. That's awesome.
That's good.
I'm gonna use that.
Yeah. I mean, it's really, really helpful. It's wild because I have literally seen a change. I mean, early in my leadership journey, I would ask people, do you have feedback? And they go, no, it's all good. And then I just started changing. It's like, hey, what feedback do you have for me? And what's crazy is they answer. They absolutely answer that question because it's an open-ended question instead of a close-in question where the path of least resistance is to say nothing.
This is really helpful because it just opens up the conversation that like nobody is above feedback.
Yes, I agree. And if anyone in your organization is above feedback, that's the beginning of the end. I really, really believe that. And I'll never forget, we did an interview years ago with, he actually lives here in the Valley, Hazard Lee. He trains F-35 fighter pilots, and he was a F-35 fighter pilot himself. And he would talk about these post-mission feedback sessions where they would have the video, and there would literally be 100 people in the room, and all ranks, right? And he said it was group learning, and he said everyone in the room was expected to give and receive feedback from everyone in the room. And man, how powerful is that the 4-star general is not above receiving feedback from the entry level. Now, there's going to be something that we talk about later that talks a lot about the wisdom with how we deliver feedback. And remember, part of delivering feedback well is it's always in service of the best interest of the other person. And it's probably ineffective feedback if it's delivered in such a way that they can't receive it. And some of that you can influence. Obviously, that's largely influenced by the other person's heart posture as well. But we shouldn't negate our role in delivering feedback in a way that actually contributes to positive action moving forward.
Yeah. One of the things I really like about, the aviation community in general, but also like being in military aviation, and I can't imagine doing this with like 100 people. So yeah, that blows my mind. But like even when I was in the Coast Guard, it was like every flight, right? You had a pre-flight brief, like this is what we're going to go out to do. These are the conditions. This is the plan. You would then execute it, and then on the back end, there was always a flight debrief, and that was an opportunity to share with each crew member, like, hey, like this is, this is helpful and this is unhelpful, or, here's a technique that you could use to make it easier on my role and on maybe the rest of the team, or you did this really well, like you communicated really well here. And I think just being able to actually just make the space for that. And then also, I mean, at the time, like I was an enlisted person talking with, at some moments, like the aircraft commander he was like the captain of the base. And so it's like, he's head honcho at the air station, and I'm potentially, the space is there to open up the opportunity to give feedback on how well he did.
Yeah.
And that's a really interesting dynamic when you then go back into like the day to day, and on the roll chart, I'm way below where he is. So,
and that's the culture we ultimately want in our organizations. I think that it's available and you can, right? I guess another thing that I would point out there is that becomes way more vibrant and I think happens more in the presence of a clear plan and clear outcomes, because then you're kind of giving someone the framework within which they can give feedback to you. And you also give people the framework in which they can get feedback themselves. This is another hyper practical thing that I've learned from a leadership perspective is if I give someone clear outcomes and a clear plan, right. We do this for our experience talks, right? Like we'll delegate an experience talk to someone on the team. This is a high stakes item, right? We're giving you sometimes 90 minutes with 40 plus customers that have invested a lot of time and a lot of money to be in that room. And we've, really trusted you with that 90 minutes. And I try really hard, to create clear outcomes of like, this is what we want to be able to say is true at the end of this talk, right? And then what's so helpful is on the back end of those talks, what I've learned to do is before I say anything in terms of feedback or evaluation, I ask them, what feedback do you have for yourself? Because it's way better for them to evaluate themselves and kind of like hear themselves say, here's what I could do better. Here's what I did well. And then also, I'm not dogpiling on things that they already know. A lot of times it can actually be really demoralizing for people to be like, oh my gosh, my leader, quote unquote leader, thinks I'm an idiot because they're having to tell me these things. And it's like, I already knew these things. And I've been thinking about these things since the day I gave that talk, right? It feels way more empowering to be like, here's the feedback I have for me. And then we can say, okay, then I think this might be a blind spot for you. This could be something you could work on.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of when that's played out really well?
Every time we do experience talks, like I would say that occurs, and I'll often ask the question, and the coaches on our team that are giving these experience talks, they'll say, yep, here's my feedback for me. Bam, 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 bam. And I'll say like, man, there's sometimes where I'll say like, man, you wrote down some of the exact same things that I wrote down, so I'm going to skip those from my list. There's sometimes where it's like, I think you're perceiving this inaccurately. I think you're beating yourself up. And then there's other times where it's like, then I have to ask, here's another thing I would ask is like, okay, I asked you for feedback. What feedback do you have for you? And you gave me a list of negative things that you want to change. Feedback is both positive and negative. Yeah. So what's the things you did well? And then, man, you can hear confidence grow in someone whenever you hear them say, oh, well, I think I did this well, this well, this well. And a lot of times, a lot of the gold is in amplifying what we're already doing well. So that can be really valuable too.
All right, let's move on to the next one.
Okay, so the next one is normalize sharing feedback early, clearly, and often. And the word I would highlight there is normalize. And it should be normalizing and onboarding. Like this, if you want to create a healthy feedback culture, then that needs to be onboarded. It should not be expected from day one. Why? Because a healthy feedback culture is not normal. Most people that come to work with you, if you're not their first job, which it's highly unlikely that you are, they're coming to you from an unhealthy feedback culture and an absent feedback culture, which is an unhealthy feedback culture, right? And so everyone says, oh, we believe in honest, open feedback, and very few organizations do it. So when you start doing it, they're going to feel like, oh, something is wrong. This is weird. And so you have to teach it. You have to train it. It's one of these side reasons why we're doing the feedback growth room in the community is because we just hired 3 new people, and I realized this needs to be part of their onboarding plan. And I said, well, we're going to do it for their onboarding plan. We might as well do it for the whole membership community as well, right? And so I'm just killing 2 birds with 1 stone, and we're going to teach our feedback lesson, right? To normalize. Like, this is really, really normal. And feedback is not a sign that something is wrong. It's actually a sign that something is healthy. We can talk about anything, and then we're going to work together to move forward. And so in onboarding, in one-on-one meetings, and then during or after, anytime you do shared work together, create space for feedback so that they can start to get used to it.
I think what's really important about this is like the word create space. Like I've heard a lot of leaders say, I have an open door policy. Like if you ever need anything or ever have anything to say or like have feedback or whatever, like just come to me. But then like if most of your team is afraid to walk in that office because you haven't actually, like, as the leader, created space to give them opportunities to do that and get reps for them to understand and build trust with you that feedback is okay, like they're not going to come to you.
That's exactly right. I've heard it said that the distance from your office to their desk is 50 feet. The distance from their desk to your office is 5 miles. Right? Like it's way harder, right? There is so much resistance to go from man, I'm a contributor on this team that is going to walk into my leader's office and have a discussion about how I could be more effective if they modified some things that they're doing. Even though that stuff might be true, and I might even deliver it in the most polite way, it's just the resistance to doing that is mounts. And if I'm in the first 90 days, right, or if I'm in the first year, oh my gosh, right? Now, conversely, if I as a leader go and say, hey, we're in your first 90 days, what feedback do you have for me on how I can help you be successful? Number one, I think that's going to make an incredible impression on them. I mean, it's rare that I ask that question of someone and they don't ask back, what feedback do you have for me? So in some ways, you are allowing them to take ownership over their own feedback journey as well.
I mean, yeah, you're leading. In many ways, you're leading by example.
For
right?
sure. Absolutely.
So, if there was like one hyper practical thing somebody could do to like start creating a culture where feedback is early, clear, and often, and creating opportunities to do that, what would it be?
I would say give feedback, right? Like see something, hopefully it's in an arena where you've established standards or something like that, or you want to establish standards. And then I would say, go to the person. If you see something that's a deviation or off, or you see that there's something better that could be done in order to achieve those aims, I would request their opt-in and just say, hey, can I give you just a little bit of feedback? And they say yes, right? If they say no, we've got a different that's a different podcast episode probably. And then, ask them, or tell them kind of, here's my thought. And then maybe ask them like, is there something that I'm missing here, right? Is there something that I'm missing here that doesn't make sense, right? And then you can have a really genuinely curious conversation. And then here's the big thing is on the back end of that later in the day, normalize a return to normalcy, right? So if this is the type of person you would go get lunch with, say like, hey, you want to grab lunch later today or something like that, or make a joke with them or talk about something else, right? Like make sure that you find a way to prove to them, hey, this does not affect at all the way that I view you in your role, the way that I view you in your job. This is just a result that we are working on together and we're still cool, right? And you just saying that is good. You like proving that is way, way better, right?
Yeah. Why is that important?
Because a lot of people think, man, when I receive feedback from someone, they said it in the moment, but they're festering on it beyond that moment, right? And it's just sitting there, and they're thinking, man, they're thinking about this all day and all night because I'm now thinking about this all day and all night. And what you just have to prove to them is like, this literally left my mind the minute I told it to you, and I trust you to do something moving forward.
Well, let's talk about the last one before we close out.
Yeah. So the last action is to use wisdom to discern how to deliver feedback, right? And wisdom is really like, I can't give you a checklist here. I can't give you an action item of like, if this, then that. wisdom is competence with regard to the realities of life, is what Tim Keller would say. And so you're a wise leader, right? You can factor in the principles, the situation, the circumstances at play, and make a decision of how feedback is best delivered in service of another person. Because sometimes the reality is this is spinach in your teeth feedback, that I just need to be able to say this and we need to be able to move forward because it's a small thing, right? But there can be other times where you're like, if I'm being real, like, this is not spinach in your teeth. Like, this is a bigger thing. And to treat it as spinach in your teeth would actually not be serving that person, right? And so I can't tell you what to do when. I can't do that. What I can do is share with you a framework that has been really helpful for me just recently, honestly, in terms of evaluating when and how and in what medium to deliver feedback. And it's just 3 factors that should be considered. Number 1 is impact. Number 2 is objectivity. And number 3 is trust. So impact, objectivity, and trust. And I would think of these 3 things as dials, right? These are 3 kind of factors that operate as dials. And so if we kind of run ourselves through this framework, is like, say you're talking about something that it's like, man, it's high impact. It's a level 10 on the impact scale. The stakes are really, really high. It's also highly subjective. Like, my way of viewing this could be very different than your way of viewing this, and we might not be aligned. It's not like a factual thing. And trust is low, right? So it's highly subjective, it's high impact, and we have low trust, not in that, like, I don't trust you, you don't trust me, but we don't have great relational rapport, or our relationship feels a little clunky right now. Well, obviously, I shouldn't just fly by and shoot you a text message and be like, hey, this is different than what I expected, right? Obviously, this is the type of thing that it's so high impact, it probably warrants like scheduling a sit-down conversation and saying, I want to discuss this. The other thing that those dials can help with, and we can run through more hypotheticals if we want to, is evaluate impact, trust, objectivity. And in light of that, you can kind of answer the question, how assertive should I be versus how curious should I be? Can I deliver this feedback in writing, or does it need to be in person? How much time should I leave for this discussion? How formal should this conversation be? Those are all things that the answers to those will come based on your evaluation, again, of impact, objectivity, and trust in the relationship.
What if there's like a disconnect between the impact, like the team member perceives it to be, versus what you perceive it to be?
Yeah. Are you picturing that I perceive it to be high impact and they perceive it to be low impact?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I would say if there's misalignment in impact, objectivity, or trust, then you have your answer, right? I need to sit down and we need to discuss this. Because really, the feedback at that point is not about the thing. It's about the fact that we're misaligned on the thing.
Right.
Right. It's about the fact that your perception of the thing is small and my perception of the thing is big. And it's really good to kind of lay down our armor and not think like I'm going into this with the right answer, especially if you do trust the person.
Yeah.
Right. It's really good to lay down the armor and just be like, we are not seeing eye to eye here. We should talk about this, and we should each explain kind of where we're coming from.
If there was like anything you wanted someone to take away from this conversation, what would it be?
As a leader, a healthy feedback culture is your responsibility, right? So the health of the organization's culture, or the shared values and behaviors of a team, is your responsibility as a leader. That's one of your like core success statements that you should be focused on. And part of that culture being healthy is the ability to receive and give feedback in a healthy way. And so what I would tell you is red, yellow, green, the health of your organization's feedback culture. And based on where you're at, ask yourself, okay, what could I do to take this red to yellow? Or what could I do to take this yellow to green? And make sure that if it is green, you are never more at risk of complacency than when something is green. You're regularly developing and depositing into that, so you don't just allow it to actually drift backwards from where it's at.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Ben. Hey, y'all, thanks so much for watching. If you want more content like this, we've got some killer stuff planned. So make sure you rate, review, and subscribe. Let's go, let's go, let's go.